Yo, checking in here. This is Derek Bros with the Conscious Resistance Network. Today is Saturday, November 15th, 2014. This is the Conscious Resistance Live, episode number 30. Yay, 30! It's been a year now since you guys out there in the internet and in Houston, around the country, helped fund, through Indiegogo campaigns, helped fund this operation, the Conscious Resistance Network. Previously, theconsciousresistance.com had just been my site for my solo activism, and with the help of some good people, we decided to take it and expand it beyond just me and introduce other writers and vloggers and people with ideas who are curious about the ideas of liberty, anarchy, spirituality, consciousness, psychedelics, alternative, counterculture, things like this, for make it a more than just liberty but a lifestyle. This is what we're building now, because I've recognized and I've been shown by some good people that in order to further the message of liberty, we're going to have to affect culture, and John Vibes talked about this last week in Austin, Texas. But we're going to have to change the hearts and the minds. In order to do that, we need to be involved in music. We need to create a website, a platform, a network where people can come and they can find the latest news and information that they're curious about and look up philosophy and ideas like that. And they can also, my hope is to grow the Conscious Resistance into this. They could also come to our site and find organic cooking videos and recipes, using non-GMO ingredients, or just how to do it yourself videos, DIY videos, Skillshare videos. We've hosted those before. They could also look up and find independent alternative music that has a positive message and maybe is sort of anti-government, anti-establishment of all kinds. So this is what I want the Conscious Resistance to grow into. This is what we've been working on for the last year. In some ways we have achieved that goal, in other ways we're still working on it, but of course with your help and your support we can continue to do this. So if you ever feel like investing in our website, in our writers and our team, so that maybe one of these days some of us could get paid as we grow this, because that I write for, or you may know that I write for several different organizations and people, including Ben Swan, the Liberty Beat, Anti-Media, Tony Styles, and occasionally contribute to other sites. I would like to get to a point where all my money and energy and time could focus on building the Conscious Resistance as a platform for people who enjoy these messages. And I seem to find more and more people every time I give a speech about spirituality, consciousness, self-reflection, introspection, and how that works with the ideas of self-government and self-rule. I find more people speaking out and connecting with me, so that's a powerful thing. So we've been around now for about a year in this current format, and thank you of course to Neil Rademacher for building the website. If you haven't been, check it out, it looks beautiful. Also subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/consciousresistance, and of course our SoundCloud is soundcloud.com/TCR live if you want to keep up with these podcasts and the videos, vlogs from Katie Chaos, Peaceful Anarchism, Danilo. Who else is doing videos? I do videos. Other people contribute, and at the website, tons of articles, including this week we had new videos from me and John Vibes, who's our other writer, speaking at the Alt Expo in Austin, Texas. Check those out. Katie put out a video, an interview she did with Jeffrey Tucker last week at the Students for Liberty conference in Philadelphia, so that's pretty cool. Check that one out. And Francis, our friend who's writing from Argentina, who's just joined the team recently, he is continuing and will finish his series, How to Live What You Believe, with part 3. So there's 3 of those parts available, and he's just now started to put them out as well in Spanish. So we have How to Live What You Believe in Spanish, part 1 out as well. And I talked to him the other day. I told you guys about him a couple weeks ago, that he contacted me and from Argentina, just saying that he's recovering from PTSD and trying to find ways to deal with that, and spending time up in the mountains and really getting opportunities to be with himself and go down those important roads has helped him in many ways. So I'll probably do a Skype interview with him pretty soon, and he's going to write more detailed pieces for us about how he found himself down there in Argentina exactly. So look out for that as well. And Peaceful Anarchism put out an article, The Philosophy of Liberty, What is Voluntarism, and also another interview with I believe Cody Drummond is the name. He's the guy behind the Peacekeeper app, which is really awesome because it's a free market alternative to calling 911. So That's not somebody peeing in the background, if you can hear that. If you guys hear that water, that's somebody filling up a cup. I just want to make sure in case later somebody was curious if somebody was peeing in the background. That was not peeing, I promise. Alright, so yeah, so that's all happening on our website, theconsciousresistance.com. And of course, as I said, you can subscribe to our network at youtube.com/consciousresistance and SoundCloud if you want to get the audio. I'm going to put up the audio from my speech and John's speech. I find that some people enjoy reading or listening more than watching, but I'm doing this video version here for those of you who want to watch the podcast just as much as you might want to see it. And it's early Saturday morning and I'm having some allergy issues, so if I look a little funny, just cut me a break. Alright, so we're going to dive through some news, the latest news from this week, and then jump into the more important stories that I'll spend a little more time on that I think you should know about, and we'll be done with this in about an hour. This show's an hour long, so yeah, sorry, I'm looking at the stories I want to cover today. Net neutrality. Yeah, there's a lot of good things happening. Good things and, of course, important topics that we need to know about. Let's just dive into it. Ferguson, Missouri. What's been going on out there, right? Well, let me pull up this article. Ferguson basically has continued to be an active protest and networking site for activists who care about social justice, racism from cops, police brutality. So it's a wide range of people who are involved in this. And let me just address this right off the bat. I've found every time I write about Ferguson, and I don't want to believe it's just benswan.com because I've seen it over on the anti-media pages too and other places. And of course, this is Facebook, this is social media, but these are real people in some cases. Sometimes they're just fake government bots. But for the people who are real people, I see that there's a lot of racism. And every time I write about this, people, well, I want to say on both sides, people have already jumped to conclusions. And I really encourage you to read my article. It's called Reflecting on Ferguson. It's on benswan.com. Just give that a search with my last name and you'll find it. I spent 5 days out there a couple months back, 2 weeks after the incident happened, and really trying to go out and do some investigative work and interview people who were supporters of Darren Wilson and people who were supporters of Mike Brown, of course, and tried to talk to cops, and was there in some of the action, and went home with the feeling that a lot of things that should have happened didn't happen on the police's side. Like, for example, I don't think they should have left that body. I don't think it's standard operating procedure for them to leave bodies in the middle of the street for 4.5 hours, but they did. And I interviewed some people there and got an exclusive piece of information that the guy who picked up the body, the company who picks up the bodies and takes it to the mortuary or to the St. Louis County medical examiner, was also a supporter and friend of Darren Wilson. And obviously that's not groundbreaking necessarily, but that's a little conflict of interest. Some might say that the guy who came there, and you can see in one short video driving a black SUV picking up Mike Brown's body, is a friend of Darren Wilson and is later at a rally for him. So I don't know. If I was the family, I might have some question as to what could have happened with the body between then and the medical examiner's office, or if a friend of his is handling the body and taking it there, would they have not tried to maybe conceal certain piece of evidence if it did make Darren Wilson look bad? I just think that's a bad move, and I wouldn't advise them to take that route. I mean, I wouldn't have done that if I was those cops, but I wouldn't be a cop, so but yeah, Ferguson is waiting the grand jury decision any day now. It didn't happen this week. It's Saturday, so obviously the next date it could happen would be Monday. I hear people saying sometime next week. I hear other people saying all the way into 2 weeks from now. I don't really know, but I've been going back and forth because I've got the cash to do it. I could definitely use some support if anybody wants to invest and would like to support me in my efforts to report firsthand from Ferguson for you guys and write some more articles and just get information out that you might not be getting other places. Get in touch with me. The Bitcoin address is always on our website, and if you want to do PayPal, hit me up at dbros@thehoustonfreethinkers.com. But yeah, either way, I will be in Ferguson, either with your support, financial support, or on my own, and get some information out there to you guys, because this is an important topic that we need to stay on top of. And honestly, as I'm sure some of you have noticed, that it's going to get down, man, across the country for whatever reasons. If you wherever you side on the issue, obviously people are upset, and everything's pointing to Darren Wilson not being indicted. I mean, I said that months ago, and I interviewed people while I was there who also said the same thing, said that if he wasn't indicted, that Ferguson would burn, that it was going to happen all over the country, and there was going to be a lot of crazy stuff happening. I tend to agree with that assessment, and from what I've seen, that's really the direction we might be headed, unfortunately. And I just hope that those who are there can come from a place of clarity of what they're after. And I talked about this. We did a video a while back called what was that called? It's called "Who's Leading This Revolution Anyway?" Please check that out on our YouTube channel. And it really just discussed how a lot of people out there don't seem to have a deep understanding of what they're after, of what their position is, what they mean when they say "fuck the police" or "down with the system," and all these various forms of rhetoric that are non-specific. And when I talk to people, sometimes they don't really understand what it is they're after, what their goals are. And I think that we need to be rooted in our goals to truly know them, so that other people can't sway us from what we're after, and so that we also can't be swept up in some false revolution of sorts, which we know happens in other countries, and we'd be naive to think those type of things don't happen here in America. Now I'm pulling up the next story, which is one I've been following right here, related to Guantanamo Bay and force feeding. If you keep up with my work, or you keep up with this podcast or videos, then you know I'm on top of this story. It's another one that I think needs more attention. So we're going to dive into this real quick before we touch on some 9/11 news. A judge this week, federal judge, refused to halt force feeding at Guantanamo Bay. This judge, for most of the trial, seemed to be on the side of the people and not the side of the government. She continued to make statements like she wouldn't allow the federal government to hold the proceedings in private, away from the public, although they tried. She wouldn't allow them to keep the videos private. They showed them in court, and they're supposedly going to be released, even though the federal government is fighting the release of these videos. I mean, I don't really know. I hate issues like this, because it's like, we need to pressure them somehow, right? Release this video, release these videos, so we can show the world. And I think it'll show the world how fucked up this government is and the way they're treating people. And more than likely, yeah, it probably will inspire more terrorists. And I think that's a sad thing. But I think the people need to know, if we can finally wake up the American people, and really people around the world who are blind to the military-industrial complex and the war apparatus, we can wake those people up to what's really going down and the way people are being treated, and that we're no better than people back in the olden days, cruel and unusual punishment. We still have it going on right now, so we need to wake them up to that. I don't know how to do that. I guess they say write your senators, call them, do this and that, tell them to support the release of this, and maybe that'll help if more of those people go out in public and take that stand. But unfortunately, if these tapes don't get released before January, whenever the Republicans take office, obviously both of them are bad. I'm not even trying to play that game. But in this two-party system board game that they're playing, this theatrical play they have showing to us, the Republicans play the character and play the role of the people who are supporting torture, and they will definitely, by playing their role when they come into power in January, they will not support the release of these videotapes. So if these tapes don't come out between now and then, it's more than likely we won't see them. But this past week, federal judge Gladys Kessler said that she would not alter the force feeding that is being done to hunger striker Abu Diab, who's a Syrian citizen who's been in there since 2002 and been cleared since 2009 of any wrongdoing. He's one of the people who've been hunger striking, participating in hunger strikes since last summer, and also being force fed by the officials there at Guantanamo Bay prison in Cuba. She said the practice lacked compassion and common sense, yet still sided with the government on the practice. She said that his attorneys failed to prove that his constitutional rights were being violated, and they're apparently going to appeal the decision, and his lawyers have called on the American public to demand to see the force-feeding videos that the Obama administration has fought to keep private. So yeah, again, they're telling us it is really up to the public to say, we demand to see this, we want to know what's happening, what our tax dollars are paying for. I wish people would respond more like that, but are the politicians going to listen? I don't know. They don't listen usually. But in this case, we can hope. So, If anything, this is what you can do. Go to the street, because it's not about, there's always some solution. Make flyers about this. Go talk to people. Create a community group and hold documentary screenings. There's plenty of good coverage, including Vice got some good coverage. If you look up YouTube, there's many documentaries about the force feeding and about torture. Hold a community documentary screening at a neighborhood center somewhere near you live. I don't know. There's plenty of things that we can do. I don't want to leave you feeling powerless, because obviously the idea that government action is the only action is completely false. Now, this story, accused 9/11 plotter speaks up about Saudi royalty connection. I'm going to kind of get through these next stories real quick so we can get to the deeper stuff I want to talk about. And then in a bit, I'm going to play a clip from John Trudell, who is an American Indian activist who's been active in the 60s, the 70s, and 80s, really active, and continuing to the 90s and the 2000s. I think he's just kind of gone quiet the past couple years. He is an amazing person that more and more, every day that passes, I just fall in love with his words and his ability to convey a very simple message about what's happening in the world. And it's interesting to hear him say these words about what's happening and to see that it's the same thing that was happening back then when he's talking about it is happening right now. The farce known as the 9/11 trials has continued with all sorts of incidents of spying on the trial, interference from outside sources that are unknown even to the judge, attempts to turn witnesses into informants. It's been really shady, and if you study 9/11, you understand like what's at stake if any sort of real truth is exposed about the funding and the backing, Saudi Arabia, Israel, of the attacks. Then you know that they have to make these trials a farce and essentially make these people out to be bloodthirsty murderers who can't be trusted and need to be locked away as soon as possible. This is what's happening to the so-called 20th hijacker, Zacarias Musai, I think. He recently notified a U.S. district judge that he wanted to testify about the involvement of Saudi royal family, of the Saudi royal family in the financing of the 9/11 attacks. Now, this is not really that surprising if you've paid attention for a while, and recently there was the campaign by Ron Paul and others to declassify the 9/11 documents. Right now there's a bipartisan congressional effort to release 28 pages of the Senate report on 9/11. Most of it's classified, of course, but those who have read it, the government officials who have read it, have said that it would, if the American people saw these documents, it would cause them to rethink everything they know about 9/11. And one of them said he had to keep stopping to reassess what he was told about 9/11. And most of it points to Saudi Arabian royalty backing, of course, the bin Laden family being from Saudi Arabia, and the United States, the petrodollar, being based on a relationship between the Saudi government and the American government. So for whatever reasons they financed and helped fund these attacks, either the American government is powerless to do anything about it because they're so beholden to them in the economic front, or the American government is working together with them and this whole attack America was part of some bigger plot. I don't know, but the fact that this guy is coming out saying he's ready to talk about this is a huge deal. He claimed he had information on financial support from the Saudi bin Laden Group, the Arab Bank, Saudi American Bank, the National Commercial Bank of Saudi Arabia, and other individuals. So his request to give testimony came during a lawsuit that was filed by family members of the victims. Interesting story. And if you know about my work, then I'm a 9/11 news hound. I stay on this every opportunity I can, and I will continue to do so. Now, a story I want to spend a little more time on has to do with the Mexico 43 that I've been writing about and talking about for the past month or more since the incident happened. And at first I really didn't see many people in the independent alternative media paying much attention to this, and I'm glad now that it's getting more attention. I'm horrified that this type of thing has happened, but I'm glad that it's got the attention that it deserves. Of course, I'm discussing the kidnapping and murder of 43 students from Mexico who were initially suspected of being kidnapped by gang members or cartel members in the area because the students were involved in protests. Now, this movement has grown massive, and it's leading towards calls for national strikes on November 20th next week. Already, though, you may have seen some of the coverage by RT. Thankfully, RT, Al Jazeera America, some of the independent, more alternative media is out there, and I myself am contemplating a trip down to Mexico if I can afford it, or just have the connections to safely get out there, because I would love to document the situation. I think it's important to show what's really happening. But these students have been missing. This is how corrupt the Mexican government is. The government itself, in the local area, the mayor was a part of it. She fled town. All the local officials were basically a part of it in some capacity, so they have all left. And the people have taken to burning down the governor's building, looting and burning government buildings. That tens and thousands of people, I mean, you can see in this picture kind of right here, tens and thousands of people have taken to the street to protest these injustices, and I'm thankful for this. It says 131 organizations, among them student organizations, trade unions, and grassroots groups, called for a national strike on November 20th of this year. The call was made during the rally that was held yesterday in the Mexican capital of Mexico City to demand justice for the missing 43 students from the Ayotzinapa Teachers School. Sorry, that was a horrible pronunciation, but I tried. A spokesperson for the University Students' Assembly, which brings together 110 schools, made a deliberate call to other sectors of Mexican society to join the fight, saying, "The struggle we face today will be a long one, but we must continue because what we want is the radical transformation of the conditions in which we live. This is a before and after. Only organization from below, only the struggle can confront the pain and injustice." So yes, the attacks on these students is unprecedented, because in interviews with Mexican citizens, they've said, we're used to the corruption, we're used to the violence, and we understand that that is already a horrible thing, but never before have we seen this type of thing where students were attacked and students were taken and murdered. And now it's sparking a larger movement for justice, and there will be strikes and rallies being held on November 20th around the nation as far as Mexico goes, and in the United States, and I believe probably there will be solidarity movements in other countries. So this is becoming an international movement calling for justice. People are calling for the Mexican president to resign. As I said, the local officials are all corrupt and have left, tried to escape. And this corruption goes all the way to the top. I've talked about this before as well in an article that was discussing community defense, auto defensas, as an alternative to the police state, an alternative to traditional policing. And I do believe that they offer a better alternative. I don't want to say that community defensing is going to be perfect by any means, but we know that there would be some accountability. This type of violence wouldn't be allowed to continue. The corruption, we wouldn't allow this to happen, or we want to believe that at the least. And Mexico offers an example of how corrupt governments will fall apart. This, I would dare argue, this is the future of the American people. This is the future of the United States. If the government continues on this path of imperialism and global empire, which will eventually collapse underneath its own weight, economically we won't be able to survive. It's unsustainable in all ways. And as that happens, as the government becomes weakened, people theorize and see in Mexico that gangs will start to become more powerful than the government, and those government will just basically serve as puppets, even more than they are now, to the gangs, the cartels. Now, in the United States, we already have cartels like this. We have the banking cartels. The international banking cartels work in all countries, and they're even they are involved in the illegal drug trade, and they are involved in the cartels. And obviously, we know the United States government is involved in giving them weapons in different programs like Operation Fast and Furious and the grenade running thing we talked about last week. So we see how that's a possibility. But as an anarchist, or at least as somebody who believes in the smallest government possible and I only believe in voluntary self-governance and communities who come together voluntarily, how can we create solutions in a situation in Mexico? Because, I mean, I'm talking to people from Mexico who are like, I'm living this, man. Like, your Auto Defensos article, it was good for one part, but that's not what's happening in my part of town. And, there's a lot of violence here. And then other people who are saying, the violence down there is the only way. So as far as the non-aggression principle, these people have been aggressed upon for quite some time, and now they're getting sick and tired of it. So please keep up with that. National strikes and action on November 20th. Mexico 23 hashtag Mexico 23. And just on a side note here, this is just kind of a tangent I'm going to go on for a second, personal thing here, so I hope you don't mind. I feel like recently I've come under attack from a couple of friends, or let's just say, some people who feel like my desire to cover the Mexico 23 story, and this is, of course, these are the specifics of the story, but this could be applied to any bigger incident. That by me wanting to go cover the Mexico 23 story down in Mexico as a journalist and document it and do my part, that's my form of activism. I'll go out and hold signs occasionally still, but for the most part my activism is now journalism and getting people, thousands of more people, to know the story by spreading the information online than the 10 or 100 people that will see my sign on the street. So that's my job, that's what I do. But I've been told or felt like some people have tried to make me feel like that I'm guilty of racism of some kind or exploitation of other cultures by going to cover their stories. And I've even had this from certain communities when I come in. Obviously I want to respect a community, but somebody needs to be down there documenting what's happening. Vice is out there, other organizations, RT. I want to be down there to help cover that story and to show the world. And that's just kind of, again, the specifics of that. But what do you think about that? I mean, I think it is important for us to be aware of the communities we're coming into, whether it's to cover them for journalism or to participate in an activism with them. Solidarity is not about taking over and telling the community what it wants. But, I mean, I see a difference in that and just covering something from a journalist perspective. But what are your thoughts? All right, moving on. This week I interviewed Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, who is out here in Texas in the Houston area. She's a Democrat, and she said a lot of crazy things over the years. I found out that she apparently was ranked meanest member of Congress as far as Democrats go in a recent scientific study. Of course, not a scientific study, but it was in a satire award that she's been given now a couple of times. And also there was a Houston Chronicle 2011 analysis that showed that she has the highest turnover rate among all members of Congress. So there's some background about her. She's also a member of the Department of Homeland Security Committee, and she's a huge supporter of the surveillance state, the police state, Big Brother. She was the one as well who tried to bring the TSA onto Houston Metro as part of the Bus Safe program that we were able to successfully stop here in Houston. And I caught up with her this week to talk about, she was speaking at this Veterans Day event. Let me get this right here. Alright, there we go. There's Sheila Jackson Lee. So I asked her on Veterans Day, I asked her a couple of questions, but first I asked her her thoughts on alternative treatments for veterans, such as for PTSD, such as cannabis or even MDMA. There's been studies on yoga. There's been people looking into gardening and treatment of PTSD. Also, of course, psilocybin mushrooms. There's a lot of different areas of research that in the past have been taboo, but hey, now that we're waking up to medical cannabis, we need to consider all options. She said she was open to it. She gave me a really political answer and said that, well, I've given this much money to the veterans. She wants to make sure we know how much she's done. But for the most part, she was pretty open, and that was a little surprising to me. I also asked her what her thoughts were on the idea of the United States being an oligarchy, not a constitutional republic, or a democracy, depending on what you believe. Both of them are false. And I was, of course, referring to a recent study from some Princeton University professors as part of a nonprofit study where they found that the United States policies and laws follow the desires of special interest and corporate interest groups more often than they do the will of the people or what the people are expressing. And although the author of the study didn't come out himself and say this is an oligarchy, if you look at the definition of a rule by few and the details that he painted in that study, that's what he was describing, okay? He was describing not a dictatorship, but yes, a rule by corporate special interests, the rule of the few over the many. And that's what we have in the United States. She rejected that idea. She said, again, a really well-timed political answer. You can tell she's been studying her talking points, but she gave me the answer that, I think that it's one of the positive things about our democracy that people can believe that we have a corporate dictatorship, when in reality we have good people such as myself who are out there fighting for change, and I plan to go back to DC and be one of those good people fighting for that. She did at least acknowledge that corporate interests do have sway, but she was saying that they don't have complete control. And I argued in this article that if you look at the people that she would be supporting and endorsing as part of the Homeland Security Committee, the companies that work with the Department of Homeland Security and sign contracts with them, and not only them but also with the Department of Defense, all these companies that benefit off the surveillance state, Big Brother, and the continuation of war and sending these same veterans she's out there speaking for, all the companies that benefit off that are going to be the same ones that are signing contracts with and doing deals with the DHS. So it's definitely within her interest to keep her mouth shut about the corporate oligarchy, and she played her role well. Now this next story covers something that I just found this morning. Breaking news from the New York Times, of all places. They're trying to save their reputation and help people understand that they're no longer just a mouthpiece of the CIA, but they're trying to still come up with some legitimate news. Now, according to the New York Times, more federal agencies are using undercover operations. Check this out. This is some details, juicy details. And this is the reality, again. This is the reality of being an activist. Please practice a culture of security. Don't be talking about some dumb stuff, planning hacking operations, or even joking about creating a pipe bomb or a Molotov cocktail or whatever in places you normally meet. Don't be discussing those things at all. I wouldn't pursue violent methods, but if you pursue methods of protection, you need to turn off your cell phones. You need to put the computers in another room, unplug everything electronic, go out somewhere into the woods, or meet somewhere that you don't typically meet. You don't go to your community house, you don't go to your standard operating procedure and meeting places and then start talking about secret things and be surprised when you show up with FBI agents at your house. I'm not talking about doing anything violent, guys. I'm just talking about, say you're planning some kind of subversive protest and you want it to be a surprise. You need to shut down the streets because people need to know shit's going on. Well, you don't plan that in your house, on your cell phone, on Facebook, okay? Just be smart about that. And this is why. According to the New York Times, the federal government has significantly expanded undercover operations in recent years, with officers from at least 40 agencies posing as business people, welfare recipients, political protesters, and even doctors or ministers to ferret out wrongdoing. Dressing up and posing as business people, welfare recipients, political protesters, and even doctors or ministers. Do you get this? At the Supreme Court, small teams of undercover officers dress as students at large demonstrations outside the courthouse and join the protest to look for suspicious activity. At the IRS, dozens of undercover agents suspect tax evaders worldwide by posing as tax preparers or accountants or drug dealers or yacht buyers, court records show. At the Ag Department, more than 100 undercover agents pose as food stamp recipients at thousands of neighborhood stores to spot suspicious vendors and fraud. And of course, we know about the FBI, the CIA. These people got agents all over the place, and they're just saying that the amount of this has increased. This is 1984 right here, friends. This is 1984. This is never knowing if your neighbor, if your minister, if your doctor, if your friend who needs help with food stamps, when you're just trying to be a nice guy, is actually an undercover agent of the state waiting to set you up. They're creating the mentality that we need to turn on each other, we need to track each other, we need to monitor each other, we need to be up in each other's business, and that's the only way that this government will continue to succeed. That's the only way that we as good Americans can continue to support Big Brother. Something like that, right? Seriously though, This is really disturbing. Again, not surprising. One of the things I've been going on lately, and I feel and have felt for years, I believe right now, as I'm communicating to you through a microphone and a webcam plugged into my computer, that I believe these devices, as long as they're plugged in, not only, we know that the FBI and other agencies can remotely turn on cameras. If you didn't know this, I mean, please do the research. They can turn on cameras, they can take pictures of you, so I keep mine covered. This one's here, it's never plugged into anything whenever it's not being used. These things, these microphones don't stay plugged in. But what about the microphone on your computer itself? Your desktop, your laptop? How do you turn that internal microphone off? Because I have a feeling that they're not only taking pictures and documenting us through the cameras, but what they're doing is recording our voices as we discuss things, and then they feed that into these search engines and sell it to advertisers. Think about that. Think about how much more of a, this is how they'll sell it, of course. We're going to be able to package your searches so direct to your needs, because we're listening all the time and we're going to hear what you talk about. And when you talk about certain things, you have that interesting conversation with your friends. Next time you go to search, it'll be all the information you need will be right there in a nice little package. Google will do that for you. It's coming. Just wait for them to unveil that. Also look for a document release that will confirm that there is some program that exists out there where they are recording through the microphones, and either some corporate entity or the government is then recording all these conversations, logging them into their little computer. Because I remember a couple years ago there was like a keyword list of like 120 words, maybe even more than that, that are part of this thing, this list that the government looks out for phone conversations and scanning metadata, and then they look targeted. Okay, is this person a criminal? Okay, and then they try to find the bad guys, right? So if you say China, bomb, terrorism, war, immigration, and a whole bunch of other words like that, then you might get flagged. So they may have that list, and then they're collecting all these recordings of information, analyzing that data, and then running it against their list, narrowing it down to a list of people, cross-referencing that against criminal records, cross-referencing that against groups that hang out that they see as extremism, etc., etc. Boom, you got an FBI agent at your house. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you to the perpetrators of 9/11. This past week, I spoke with the UN Special Rapporteur. I always have trouble saying that. I'm kind of not into pronouncing words today. I'm doing a horrible job at that, so please excuse my butchering of words that aren't American. But I ran into the Special Rapporteur on torture, Mr. Juan Mendez, who is a human rights activist and a lawyer and an author, who was himself victim of torture in the 1970s at the hands of the Argentina government after he was reporting on their state terrorism. He spoke in Houston this week on, Thursday night, and he was part of a panel with two other authors, gave a great discussion on torture, the United States' use of torture, and why this is such a horrible thing and something that should be addressed. Now, I want to preface this by saying I'm not the biggest supporter of the United Nations. I don't support international bodies telling me what to do any more than I do some guy in Washington, D.C. or in the state capitol telling me what to do. I just don't really buy into it. But there are international issues. I think this is one of the problems that we have to address as if you're an anarchist or even just an individualist. If you believe in autonomous communities, how do people come together and organize and work together on these global problems? Can't there be some commonly accepted things that we all agree upon, like torture's fucked up and bad? Okay, well then what organization or what power is going to enforce those things globally? Yeah, I don't know. It gets into some tricky territory, but either way, I think if the United Nations could use its voice and other people could use our voices to provide what Juan Mendez said was a universal moral condemnation of torture, if we can use the UN's voice for that and put an end to that, then I'm all for that. I'm not saying the United Nations needs to come legislate in the United States and override anything, but this should already be standard operating procedure in our country, and it was maybe at one point, or at least that's the facade that America has thrown over onto the people, that we were this great nation that didn't torture people, didn't hurt people, do any of these things. But more and more that we've discovered about reality, the truth that's happening behind the scenes, we understand that the United States government and governments in general, the state will operate in these ways and will torture people, will do whatever it can to attack the people. One of the speakers even said that. She said, I think it was Rebecca Gordon that spoke that night. She was the one that basically what she said was that torture is not even about the person, about hurting that person in general. It's about destroying connections in groups that are opposing the state. And what she means by that is basically if you have somebody that gets arrested and gets taken into to a torture center, when they release them, she said it creates fear in the community and a divide because people are always wondering, what did they say about me? Did they turn me in? Were they discussing me? And that's a powerful message. So after the talk, I interviewed Juan Mendez, and he said that what the Americans don't realize is fighting terrorism with state terror, which is what torture is, in the long run is much more counterproductive and does not reflect the values of the American people. And I love that he made that distinction. This is exactly right, 100%. Torture is state terror. Torture is an individual being authorized to commit disgusting acts on a person that would never ever be allowed on an individual basis, but they do it with the authority and the backing of the state, and it's all justified under this facade of this war on terror and the pursuit of terrorism. And that to me is why it's so important to understand what led to all this, 9/11. He also said that solutions at home are more promising than whatever the international community can do, and of course he encouraged Americans to pressure their elected officials to end support of torture programs. So we got people encouraging the American people right now to end their support of torture programs and to support the release of the Senate report on torture, which the UN official also told me to do. And we got people calling for American people to release the force-feeding videotapes from Guantanamo Bay. Those are three things that I think that if you're going to support things by calling or sending emails, doing stuff like that, or even just passing out flyers, the force-feeding Guantanamo Bay, release those videotapes. The CIA Senate report, release that report, and the 28 pages related to 9/11 funding. Those are three things that I would be emailing and writing about if I did that type of stuff. Instead, I pass out flyers and I do stuff like this. I make videos and try to talk to people. Do what you can. Now, on the torture topic, while we're at it, one of the things I learned that night and then just popped up in the news again yesterday was that there are groups who are actively fighting against torture, but they're not doing it by calling for government intervention or new laws. This is really powerful and awesome to see, I thought, because this is an example of how the market, the freed market, would provide solutions to this. So first of all, I was told about a group called, I gotta find it, I have it saved in one of my bookmarks, but it's basically architects who are against torture and against the death penalty, and so they're calling for architects to refuse and boycott dealing with contractors such as the government and other agencies who would have them build torture chambers or areas to do the executions and stuff like that. That's awesome. I mean, basically you're saying I'm going to be a conscientious architect and I'm going to care about what kind of designs I'm creating. I'm not just going to support this industry. Now, another example of this is these psychologists who are now coming out and speaking out against the torture program. And just a little background here. In 2002, the American Psychological Association revised its code of ethics to allow practitioners to follow the, quote, governing legal authority in situations that seemed at odds with their duties as health professionals. So what this did was allow them to, ignore their code of ethics that said they won't, use psychology in a fucked up way, and allowed them to do it as long as the government said it was okay and they were using those skills for torture. There was also a task force report in 2005 that said that the code allowed psychologists to participate in national security interrogations and gave the Bush administration critical legal cover for torture, because these psychologists could then say, no, what we were doing wasn't torture, it was part of this program, and they could go in court and defend it. Since then, they have removed those just following orders from their code of ethics, and in 2005, they disavowed that report and have gone on to distance themselves from this. And now these are some good details here. The New York Times reporter, former New York Times reporter James Risen's book came out last month. It's called Pay Any Price. Check that out. And if you don't know the story of James Risen, I'll do a video on that soon because you need to know his story. It revealed emails from the files of a deceased CIA contractor, Scott Gerwar, showing close contact between the intelligence establishment and leadership at the American Psychological Association. The emails centered particularly on the 2005 report and suggested that members of the Bush administration were involved in its conception and drafting. So, of course, the government's working with the American Psychological Association, Psychologists Association, to promote the use of torture as ethical and okay. Pretty messed up, guys. Now I got another. So yeah, we got one more topic, and then I'm going to wait. We got one more topic. I think I got more than that. I'm gonna wrap it up though here in just a few minutes. Okay, yeah, this is last little piece of news, and then we're gonna play a clip from John Trudell. Really excited for that, guys. I think you would dig him. Net neutrality has been in the news for months, years now, but just popped up on Facebook trends and Twitter hashtag trends this week because none other than President Obama comes out saying that ending net neutrality would end the internet as we know it. Now, of course, for those not in the know and on the surface, this seems, wow, President Obama standing up for the internet. Yay! No. What's he saying? More regulation. More regulation. We need to regulate the internet to keep it safe. On Monday, President Obama issued a statement and a YouTube video, oh, he's so hip, explaining his support for net neutrality and an open internet. The president's comments were released as demonstrators rallied outside of the home of Federal Communications Commission Chairman Tom Wheeler. Obama spoke of simple, common sense steps that could be taken to protect internet users. These simple steps included not allowing ISPs, internet service providers, to block websites to users, no creation of slow or fast traffic models, transparency, and no pay for prioritization. Whoa, that was a difficult one. No pay for prioritization of services. So that all sounds good, right? But as I said, what is it really going to end up? It means the government's going to start getting up in your internet, and what happens whenever the government gets involved in anything? It goes to shit.